The convoy's thermal wakes were already painting the dark when Commander June Park ordered the impossible. "Flood the lane," she said, and 100 cargo scows belched glittering clouds of powdered magnesium and flour, old firefighters' nightmares, into vacuum. The null-tide's sleek fractal skiffs dropped out of glide to sniff the spark curtain, with sensors that had never met combustion the old way. Park thumbed a ceramic striker against a tungsten wire stretched across space like a trip line. For one absurd heartbeat, nothing happened. Then vacuum so polite, so empty, blossomed white-blue along the wire, a crawling plasma that turned the dust trail into a blinding wall. The refugee barges slipped through the shadow of their own makeshift sunrise. "There," Park said, tasting metal. "Lesson 1, we still do fire." They had laughed 3 months earlier at the conclave under the Aurora spire. Polished hulls floated above the dais like gods wearing mirrors. The Zenith sang about light-folded armor. The Aero displayed shield harmonics that survived model supernovas. When Admiral Meyer Ortega rolled in the Terran Corvette *Hobbs*, its plates showed weld scars and serial numbers, pipes, bolts, a visible ladder. "What museum lent you that?" An Aero vizier trilled. Ortega only shrugged. "The one called History. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to register frontier patrols and to take notes. Which species trusted software more than people, which loved ceremony more than readiness." Back on Luna Yard, she had overseen a doctrine that didn't photograph well. Manual overrides you could kick, analog dials, rails that spat tungsten like teeth. She taught captains to quote Stoics between drills: "Control what you can, accept the cost." When someone asked about humanity's last brush with extinction, she said, "Pick a century." So the conclave filed the Terrans under quaint, granted them the boring sectors, and returned to receptions where finger food gravitated in sculpted spirals. Nobody listened when Ortega asked about rumor whispers of colonies that went quiet without debris. The first null-tide report was almost polite. A Lithari surveyor sent back an image of a coastline with no settlement, streets sketched in bare earth like a vampire city that had never drawn breath. Then the signal clipped, and the surveyor's carrier wave developed harmonics like chewing. Another day, another outer beacon failed. A week later, an Aero cutter fired light at a shadow, and the shadow gave it back in 100 thinner beams, like a shattered mirror made of hunger. Conferences redoubled, committees tripled. The elegant fleets agreed to proceed cautiously, to model, to probe. Ortega wrote one line on the board in her windowless room under Luna: "If energy is a language, stop speaking it." She requisitioned graphite chaff, directed foundries to pour bricks of depleted uranium, and signed orders for things nobody had asked humans to bring back into the stars: shape-charged spindles, thermite slurry, EMP howitzers that didn't handshake any network because they had no hand to give. On the outer rim, Commander Park learned the space around refugees tastes like fear and ozone. The null tide came as rumor first, then as latticed fans of something that looked alive if you squinted wrong. Sensors wobbled. Park didn't wait for a better read. She'd grown up on stories of the Dunkirk evacuations. Every hull that floated was a lifeboat, every minute stolen was a victory. "Spark curtain," she ordered. When the wall of light and burning powders ripped across the chase corridor, her own helm flinched. "Sir, combustion in vacuum. Plenty of oxygen adsorbed in magnesium dust," Park said. "Plenty of ways to misbehave." The convoy slipped free. The null-tide skiffs, confused by heat and glare unpatterned by their models overshot. Park's XO breathed again. They'll learn. They always do, Park agreed. She looked at the stars like they were chess squares and added, not for the XO, so will we. Her board chimed, priority null event Ganymede arc, Ortega's code, embedded in the packet a still image of a moon mining yard that had been there yesterday. Today a pristine circle of bedrock, no slag, no scrap, no bodies, no witnesses but vacuum. Park closed her eyes. In some academy lecture they had told her wars started with flags and speeches. This one started with an absence. Plot a vector to the arc, she said. The bridge lights dimmed to battle amber. Out beyond the spark curtain, the dark finished chewing and turned its mouth toward them. The united conclave sent delegations to Earth with velvet words and panic in their eyes. Ortega met them in a hangar that smelled like coolant and human coffee. Luna Yard was building ugly things in bulk. No symmetry, no art, just intent. We hoped you would manage logistics, the aerial envoy began. Perhaps convoy duty. Your culture excels at improvisation. Convoys are logistics, Ortega said. So is killing what hunts them. Screens bloomed with null-tide encounters. You could watch the curve of learning in their responses, first absorbing beams, then diffracting, then returning them with interest, first probing networks, then swallowing operating systems whole. They speak energy like poetry, Ortega said. So we switched to prose carved in stone. The conclave recoiled when she rolled out the doctrine. Kinetics at fractional C. Chemical fires that didn't ask permission. Thermite foams with oxidizers that carried their own air. Boarding kits with wire cutter gauntlets and magnesium spears. Barbaric, somebody hissed. Effective, Ortega said. Also bounded. She pointed at another slide, rules of engagement, civilians. We honor non-combatant protection. We don't burn habitats. We cut corridors through open void. We accept losses to keep the moral high ground. Just war isn't a slogan, it's geometry, logistics, restraint. The Harmony archivist pulsed with hesitant light. And if restraint lets the tide through, Ortega didn't blink. Then we die with our ethics intact, but I don't plan on either outcome. I plan to win within the lines. She briefed captains until her voice roughened. They talked about Midway, how feints and timing beat tonnage, about the Navajo code talkers, how human languages became armor because the enemy didn't know where to listen, about stoicism, how control of the self turns chaos into room to think. She taped a hand-lettered sign over the main board, make them learn the wrong lessons. The first joint patrol under Terran command met the tide at the Hecate Shoals. A Zamoth invisibility corvette drifted near Hobbs *, its captain purring about photon phase ghosts. Ortega's tactical officer, Lieutenant Reese, passed around earplugs. Analog whistles, he said cheerfully. If their acoustic pickups borrow our hull vibrations to model impact timing, give them a tune. The tide arrived as a lace of black geometry, gliding like a manta across stars. Conclave ships fired their beautiful light. The tide brightened and smiled the way storms do. Hold, Ortega said, and the Hobbs did something new. It dumped a pallet of steel rods the size of broom handles into the path of the manta and lit a coil. The rods left at 0, 15C without conversation. The manta flinched only once. That was all they needed. A Aero Lancer darted in through a cluster of cold iron pearls that blossomed into sticky micro-furnaces. Fires crawled. Not elegant, no. Devastating, yes. The conclave bridge feeds filled with conflicting exclamations, delight, disgust, a sound like hope trying on boots. Ortega said nothing until the manta blew apart into 4 smaller fans. "See," she murmured. "Learning is a two-way contagion." Her comms chief raised a hand. "Admiral, the tide just stopped pinging our lasers. They're listening to vibrations, to us." "Whistles," Reese said, grinning like a schoolboy. The Hobbs sang through steel and vacuum, a human rhythm off-meter enough to sabotage predictive filters. The tide's child fans blinked and turned the wrong way. The conclave delegation found Ortega after in a corridor lined with old pressure suits. "You will lead?" they asked, not quite begging, not quite proud. "I'll coordinate," she said. "Park will lead this sector, Cole the next. We won't be pretty, we'll be present. Name your price." "Respect for lines we won't cross, and rails, lots of rails." She signed the order that would read in hindsight like destiny and in the moment like exhaustion. Hellfire Grinder Initiation, Phase I. Then she closed her eyes and pictured a coastline that had been erased, and let herself want to burn something that had no face. They called the first counteroffensive operation Kiln because it promised bricks and heat and the patience of clay. Park's task group, tin cans with proud names. *Milwaukee*, *Gala*, *Udu*, escorted a snake of barges toward the Ganymede Arc while Arrow Lancers scissored the flanks. Ahead, the shoals rippled with gravitational eddies. Behind, the conclave news feeds argued about moral regression and necessary savagery. Park muted them and checked her crew's suit seals one by one. Found family starts with hands on valves. Null-tide signatures unfolded like cuttlefish, precise and curious. This time they didn't chase light. They listened. They feathered tendrils into the void to taste micro-impacts, to time guns. Park gave them music again. Hull beats mapped to a swing her grandmother loved, then cut the rhythm mid-measure and fired a ragged salvo. The tide reached for the wrong beat. Tungsten broom handles punched holes through geometry that had mistaken elegance for inevitability. "Pearls," Park said, and the Arrow Lancers threw their micro-furnaces, blooming white where they stuck. The fires crawled along filigree and turned it to ash that had never been wood. The tide learned on the second volley. Their surfaces sloughed into mirrored sheets that scattered rods, their tendrils braided to damp vibration. "They adapt," Park's XO murmured. "We expected it," Park said. "We invited it." The convoy reached the Ark, which was a word for a community threaded along magnet tethers and mining towers, or had been. Now it was a sketch in absence, cranes without cables, moorings that held nothing. The barges began to moan on the net, the sound of people whose nouns had been stolen. "Rescue first," Park ordered. "We clear berths, She stopped. The tide had left bait, a ring of lifeboats broadcasting weak SOS from within a cul-de-sac of folded space. Everyone could see the geometry, everyone could do the math. "They expect moral geometry to be predictable," the XO said quietly. Park thought of just war as more than slogans: proportionality, discrimination, risk to self when it buys lives. She keyed the fleet. "We're taking the corridor. Lancers, cut us 2 slits. *Udu*, you're our Dunkirk. Take every hull that can pressurize and run relief to the ring. *Milwaukee*, will sit in the throat and hold." The tide smiled their black smile and tightened the cul-de-sac. The *Udu* went anyway, little and brave and stuffed with stretchers. Park ordered Gorgon charges. thermite foam darts with ceramic skins, launched ahead of Udu and detonated them staggered, so the foam fell like unmeltable snow in the singularity wake. Fires crawled in slow motion where time was unkind. Physics groaned. The corridor held. They lost 2 barges and a lancer to a learning feint that split like a swallow and pecked at the Milwaukee S stern. Park vented the aft battery to kill the tendril chewing on it. You can hear air leaving a compartment like someone you love giving up. She signed the names later with a pen that didn't forgive shaky hands. They saved 31 boats. Faces filled the net. Aryl younglings with bioluminescent freckles, a Lithari elder who spoke in crystalline chimes, a Terran deckhand blinking through soot. The conclave feed stopped arguing for a whole 6 minutes. After, in the quiet that isn't, Park listened to hull technicians sing in 3 languages as they patched what could be patched. The tide kept their distance, busy folding themselves into shapes that would shrug thermite and split rods. Park set a course deeper because that was the doctrine. Don't give them time to get comfortable. We're not beautiful, she told her crew in the brief they deserved. We're necessary. The net pinged with Ortega's update. Phase Roman II authorizations, expanded fuses, permission for EMP howitzers in empty corridors. A footnote nobody read at first. Reports of nodes, coordination centers may be mobile. Park didn't like the way the letters looked. The last thing the tide needed was a brain. She stared at the star map until the lines of probability made her temples ache. Plot me a route that steps on their learning curve, she said. The XO's smile was brief and fierce. A waltz in odd time, ma'am. By the time Admiral Ezra Cole's carrier Jefferson limped into the threadbare expanse, the tide had grown a new trick, kinetic skins. Their fans wore plates that butted off to intercept rods, shells that diffused impact the way snow quiets sound. Our language had become theirs. Our nouns had been conjugated against us. Ortega's reply was not subtle. She didn't believe in clever knives when a hammer would do. Prometheus packets, she ordered, and Luna Yard shipped out canisters that looked like ballast tanks. Rust bombs, engineers called them. Little bio-labs weaponized to love iron the way fire loves pine. Release them near a tide node, and the enzyme chains would start chewing. No light, no neat signature, just decay accelerated into murder. Cole convened his captains in a wardroom that smelled like solvent and men who'd slept in armor. Lines still hold, he said. Non-combatant fire breaks stand, but Prometheus requires proximity. He didn't say the word boarding, everyone could taste it. The Harmony archivist on his staff raised a careful hand. Sir, if these enzymes travel, they die without feedstock we tailor, Cole said, and we fire them only inside unliving tide mass. We're not here to salt Earth. We're here to make a mouth too busy rotting to bite. He kept a picture of Midway taped under his display, not as fetish but as reminder. Timing flips empires. He briefed a plan that sounded like blasphemy to the conclave and like breakfast to Terrans. Faint with light, let them think they've won the language war. Punch with rods, watch them bud kinetic skins. Then close and cut an entry, ride the pressure corridor in and crack a Prometheus tank at the seam of a suspected node. Sir, his XO said softly when the room emptied, you're volunteering yourself. Somebody has to play the melody, Cole said, and I still remember the chords. The node betrayed itself by hunger. Park, running the waltz from the arc, lured a cluster of fans into overcommitting on a decoy convoy, then sent a drone sniffing for a deep harmonic in the background noise, a patience beat, impossible to spoof with local learning. The drone died, but not before singing two notes that made Ortega sit up very straight. The *Jefferson* went in with lancers tight to her ribs and *Hobbs* under her wake like a remora. The node looked like nothing on any chart, a dimming of stars, a wrongness in interference patterns, a sense that you were in the vestibule of a cathedral that ate light. Light faint, Cole ordered, and the conclave ships did as taught, painting polite beams into a shadow that smiled back in knives. Rods, he said next, and the *Jefferson* fired a mosaic of tungsten like sleet. The skins bloomed to catch and broke into bouquets of powder. Third movement, silence. The carrier cut every extraneous system. Steel whispered over steel as boarding clamps armed. Non-combatant corridors marked clear. The Harmony archivist said, voice trembling but held true. No habitats within 50,000 clicks. Then we honor our lines, Cole said, and drove the *Jefferson* forward until her prow kissed a seam that was more a suggestion than a wall. On *Hobbs*, Ortega watched the telemetry and pressed a hand against a bulkhead like you might steady an old friend. Prometheus ready, Reese reported. The canister sat in a cradle, innocent as a farm barrel. The node flexed. A tendril like a negative of lightning slid along the *Jefferson*'s flank and peeled back armor as if it were wet paper. The carrier bled atmosphere and men. Cole's voice came across flat and even. We're attached. Marines, your corridor is open. Archivist, pray if that's your work. Park, cover us with ugly. Gladly, Park said, and played hull music so violently that the tide's predictive filters rebroke in 3 places at once. Marines went in. They carried wire cutters and magnesium spears, foam charges, and one tank that had no poetry in it at all. The node's interior wasn't corridors so much as a throat that tested you with vibrations for the right to be swallowed. Humanity had never been good at tests written by monsters. Cole stepped into the breach last, because leaders who send others into fire they've never felt tend to make the wrong choices later. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. The canister rode on a dolly between 2 sergeants who had duct-taped saints to their armor. Somewhere in the dark, something learned to hate iron. The node shuddered. A new harmonic rolled through the throat, a bass note shaped like a hand closing. Admiral Ortega said across a channel that crackled with interference. They know what we are. Good, Cole said. Then they'll understand the next part. The corridor narrowed, the dolly jammed. The sergeants looked at Cole and he saw in their eyes the acceptance he'd carried since Midway was a story and not a place. He shoved his shoulder under the canister and heaved. The bass note became a siren. The walnut wall thickened ahead, patient as teeth. Cole grinned without humor. Prometheus at the seam, he said, breathless and almost laughing. Light it. Prometheus woke like rain on hot steel. Inside the node's not-quite corridor, the canister split along scored seams and breathed its work. Enzymes, tailored to love iron, and the trace alloys the tide had stolen from every ship it ever ate. There was no blaze, no theater, only a creeping hush as structure forgot itself. The wall flexed to expel the offense and found its muscles pitted. A harmonic's pulse rose, low as an earthquake in your bones, and broke into a rhythmic coughing. Contact, retreat corridor degrading, the sergeant called, visor haloed in error glyphs. Hold 2 minutes, Cole said. Park, paint me a screen. Outside, Commander Park's tin cans made ugly music. Her crew's hammered hull with wrenches and boots fed impact noise into the void and fired salvos out of meter. The tide's prediction nets, which had just relearned human rhythm, tumbled. Arrow lancers streaked in on razor wakes and laid more Gorgon foam across the seam. White fire crawled in rivulets, meeting the creeping rust halfway. Where heat met hunger, the node's skin went a scab. The Harmony archivist, Kieran, held the line on ethics as if it were a physical rope. Non-combatant corridors still clear, they reported, each word weighed. Your geometry holds. Cole thought about just war as geometry the way his academy instructor had drawn it on a chalkboard. Circles of protection, lines of fire kept outside them. He heard his grandmother's voice too, the one that told stories of marchers who mapped a different geometry in streets where the law turned its face away. Do the right thing long enough, she'd say, and the map redraws itself. 2 minutes, the sergeant repeated, voice thin. Sir, I can taste metal. That's you thinking about fear, Cole said, and shouldered the canister cradle again to push it farther into the seam. The floor wasn't floor anymore. It puckered. Prometheus ate faster when iron was pure and slowed on organics. The node learned and shifted to meat. The corridor tried to heal like a wound that didn't believe in scars. On Hobbs, Ortega watched 3 boards at once. They'll adapt to Prometheus, Reese said, eyes flicking, fingers on analog toggles as if the switches were prayer beads. Change substrate, spit iron, teach their skin to shed. They'll try, Ortega said. We make it expensive to learn. She keyed a circuit. Park, brace for a pressure wave. I'm going to lie with numbers. She fired the EMP howitzers just off cycle so the spike mimicked a reactor quench. The node gulped vacuum to equalize. Park rode the pressure like a surfer skimming a collapsing break and shoved the Milwaukee's prow into the widening seam, not ramming, just leaning the way you lean a shoulder into a stubborn door. Marines, backtrack, Cole called. Prometheus is seeded. Kieran hesitated, head cocked, listening to the geometry none of them could see. Admiral, the root harmonic. Spit it, Cole snapped. It's split, they said softly. Sir, the node isn't a heart, it's a choir. Something else just started singing. As if cued, the bass note doubled. The corridor behind them rippled into teeth. Park's screen shivered. Ortega's EMP faked a second quench and bought 3 lungfuls of time. Marines hauled the dolly. Someone laughed too high and didn't stop until the sergeant smacked his shoulder. Stoicism in practice isn't stone. It's a hand returning to the task. Contact at our 6. A private barked. Tendrils threaded the corridor, not attacking so much as listening, mapping muscle and bone in search of a grammar. Prometheus touched them, kissed iron traces in their growth, and left freckles of rot blooming like constellations. They withdrew. The bass harmonic dropped away. For a precious breath, the corridor thought about being a corridor again. Out, Cole ordered. They ran. The seam behind them puckered shut like a stitched wound. In the last meter, it caught Cole's leg and squeezed. The sergeant turned to cut him free. Cole shoved the man through. Go, that's an order. Park's voice came in blunt, the way friends talk when there's only truth left. Ezra, say the word. Seal it, he said. Copy. The Milwaukee kissed the seam with a thermite kiss. White crawled inward. The pain passed through Cole like a tide of ice. He didn't scream. He did not scream. Noise happened and became another kind of music for the tide to misunderstand. He fell back into Jefferson's lock half-conscious, leg armor slagged into new geometry. Through the closing hatch he saw the seam draw tight, and he saw clear as stars after a storm that Kieran had been right. Behind the base, a treble, a thin, quick intelligence shaving seconds from every lesson learned. "Admiral," Ortega called, voice flat in the way it gets when the only acceptable answers are bad. "Telemetry confirms. The node is not singular. We've got at least 3 secondaries spooling." Park's board chimed like a carousel of knives. New contacts flickered in, equidistant, triangulating. "We clipped a finger," she said. "There's a hand." Cole gripped the hatch rim until his knuckles went bloodless. "Then we teach the hand fire." He didn't get to add the next order. The stars went out. Dark wasn't night. Night had sky. This had intention. Every external feed blinked to null. Grav sensors returned nonsense. LiDAR drew Escher stares. Even star trackers lost their friends. The tide had learned a sailor's oldest trick and set a literal blindfold, a scattering fog of submicron mirrors, each oriented by a field that tasted like spite. It turned the battle space into a room of false reflections. "Analog dead reckoning," Ortega said instantly. "We go sailor, paper charts, drift integrators, no network." Reese whooped and slapped a cabinet. He trained for this like a ridiculous hobby. He dropped a monster of a sextant into a bracket under Hobbs' dome and sighted on a pulsing, not-quite star Ortega had cached for bad days. A beacon on a known pulsar, its clockwork tick older than sin. Humans had learned to steer by stubborn things before. They would again. Across the net that wasn't, Park's voice came calm. "We're Bucket Brigade. EVA relays every 5 clicks. Flash lamps, rope, hand to hand." You could hear men and women around her clip carabiners to lines like mountaineers stepping into an ice field. Tin cans paid out literal rope. Braided smart line with analog tracers sewn in between airlocks. The line thrummed as the fog pressed. Kieran stood on Jefferson's Bay with a reel in their hands and a prayer under their breath that was less words than promise. "We hold the line," they said to the Marine at their elbow. He nodded as if that was a physics you could build with. In darkness the tide sang. Not the bass now, but treble, high, clever, a melody stolen from human hulls and shifted 3 notes right. Park felt it in her teeth. Her crew's whistles stuttered. Rhythm isn't a weapon when the enemy writes counterpoint. "Change the song," she said. "Make it ugly." Her engineers obliged. They banged out a rhythm that would have gotten a drummer exiled. Stumbles, offbeats, rests where no sane ear would put them. The tide hesitated. Aero lancers added salt. Their pilots slapping wings to ring with harmonics that were just wrong enough. The fog thickened, angered, and then, because learning is a hunger with poor table manners, thinned where it reached for another lesson. "Windows," Reese shouted. Ortega threaded Hobbs through slits that weren't slits until she made them so. "Howitzers, 2 shots to the left of true, lie to them again." The EMP pulses rolled through the fog with bell-like dissonance. The tide's mirrors snapped to new orientations, exposing a wedge of honest black. Through it the pulsar beat. Hope, in astronomy units. "Where are my secondaries?" Ortega asked. "Here," Kieran said and tapped the line like a dowser tasting groundwater. 1 forward high, 1 aft low, the 3rd close. They closed their eyes, listened with bones humanity had taught politics to ignore. "Inside the fog with us." Cole lay on the med couch grim as a lighthouse. "We keep ethics," he said, voice hoarse. "Even blind." The doc taped splints and didn't meet his eyes. "You know your leg." "I know," Cole said. He'd read the geometry of his body when the hatch cut it into new shapes. He could still count. Park's Bucket Brigade worked miracles you can't teach. Eva pairs hopped hand to hand along the line, passing Prometheus grenades like firefighters passing pails in an alley. The grenades weren't meant for toss. Engineering had built them for coddled cradles and ranks of safety interlocks. The pairs did not drop a single one. You don't drop water when a city is on fire. Contact on line 3, someone yelled. A tendril nosed along the rope like a curious eel. Kieran's knife flashed silver and honest. The cut severed not the rope but the tendril, and Prometheus freckles bloomed where iron ran vein deep. The eel spasmed and withdrew. The rope sang. The line held. The forward high secondary blinked into view as a dent in the fog. Park took a squad up, through pearled furnaces until the dent smoked, then rode the pressure wave out of its dying mouth. The aft-low tried to flank Hobbs. Ortega turned her ship sideways and spat rods point-blank through its thinnest part, the way old gunners fired grapeshot across a deck. "That's two," Reese said, and grinned with all his teeth, then sobered as Kieran flinched. "What?" "The close one," they whispered. "It's not a node, it's a seed." As if to prove the word true, the fog in front of Jefferson convulsed, and a shape uncurled, small by node standards, big by everything else, wearing plates of scavenged human alloy like a teenager in a stolen jacket. Its harmonic line sounded almost like Park's terrible music. It had learned us well enough to mimic. "Admiral," Ortega said, "no theater in it, only math. If that seeds, this gets exponential." Cole sat up on the couch. Pain turned his face into angles. He reached for the channel with hands that shook only a little. "All captains," he said, "prepare for anvil." Park didn't need the rest of the brief. She'd seen the file with the warning banner. Anvil was the part of kiln that assumed you couldn't out-talk a fire. It bent history into a tool. "Call the scows," she told her XO. "Every oar cylinder, every tug. This is Dunkirk in vacuum. We borrow every hull that floats." The seed opened like a pupil. The fog leaned. The line thrummed. Park clipped her carabiner to it and stepped into the dark. They said later you could hear the tugs coming, which is absurd because sound dies the second it tries to be brave. But you felt it. A slow-growing pressure in the vacuum math as 100 labor boats and oar scows, paint scuffed and proud, answered a call the conclave had never thought to make. Names rolled across local Bitterroot, Cayo Freya, Las Mariposas, one just Nell in stencil, and their captains spoke in accents from a dozen worlds. "Where you want us?" they asked Park like a question that had never not been answered. "Make a lane," she said. "We're building a hammer." Ortega knew the blueprint by heart. Anvil took an abandoned ore cylinder, empty, tough, dumb, and wrapped it in a jacket of thermite and Prometheus, then drove it analog hard along a rope into a thing that had confused library with menu. The jacket would light at the seam. The core would keep going. It wasn't elegant. It was inevitability shaped into a spear. Kieran stood at the cylinder's mouth under Jefferson's lights holding a clipboard because sometimes you dress courage in bureaucracy so it doesn't spook. "Checklists," they murmured. "Lines, valves, fuses." The Marines clipped in around them, faces soft with adrenaline's cruel honesty. Cole rolled into the bay on a gurney, jaw set into leadership's terrible calm. "Park," he said on the private channel, "you're not riding it." "Sir," she began, "you have to bring them home." He said, "I can point a spear from a bed." Park looked at Kieran, at Ortega's face on the screen, at Tinkan Cruz who would jump for her voice because she had earned that mistake. She unclipped. "Fine," she said lightly, like she hadn't just set down a weight that would break her later. "But you're taking a pilot." "Negative," Cole said and smiled with half a mouth. "I've got one." Reese jogged into frame, helmet under one arm, joy and fear braided. Somebody's gotta keep him from overcorrecting. You're my navigator, Ortega said. He said, you taught me to steer by stubborn stars. I'll bring him to one. The Harmony archivist put a hand on both their shoulders. Lines hold because we tie them, they said. I will count. They launched the cylinder with a shove like a ship slid down greased ways. Tugs took lines on its flanks and fanned out, paying rope through calloused hands. The Seed noticed late and twitched the fog into a wall. Park's tugs leaned. The lines sang hard enough to bite gloves. The cylinder threaded the slit Ortega lied into existence with an EMP tick that stuttered. Reese called corrections like speaking to a skittish horse. The Seed learned. Plates butted to catch, tendrils braided to push. A shape that looked like a hand closed on the cylinder and met Thermite slave to proximity and Prometheus eager for breath. White crawled, rust bloomed, the hand reconsidered anatomy. Fuses hot, Kieran intoned. Line 1 holding, 2 holding, 3 snapped. The cylinder yawed. A tug surged into the gap. Nell, a boat with fresh paint over older paint, her captain a woman whose hands had moved coal and grain, and once, she told Park on a quiet watch, her own broken heart. The rope took on her hull with a bang that dimpled metal. She held. Close, Reese breathed. Closer. He could see into the Seed's mouth now, a throat that mimicked a corridor and wore human bolts as jewelry. Park saw it through his camera and bit the inside of her cheek until copper dawned. Ethics are geometry, she told herself, a map you stay inside even when the edges itch. The Seed had no civilians. The corridor was only a throat. They would not become what they fought. Seam, Cole whispered. Seam, Reese agreed and popped the last safeties with a flick that deserved a better verb than flick. The jacket lit. Not explosion, not yet ignition, a fuse flowing like liquid sunrise. In the med bay, someone watching made a sound you could shelve under awe. Let go, Park ordered. Lines slipped. The cylinder leaped. The Seed flinched and tried to learn faster than chemistry burns. It failed at human speed. The cylinder struck the seam, and for an instant you could imagine it as myth, a spear pinning a monster to the sky. Det, Reese began. The fog swallowed the image and the feed. Cole's voice continued for one more syllable, then cut. The pulsar ticked its old, indifferent beat. For a moment that stretched thin as gold leaf, the expanse held its breath. Then every mirror in the fog forgot how to be obedient, and every harmonic the tide had stolen fell out of key at once. The blindfold shredded. Stars came back with the aching clarity of grief. Shock wave, Ortega barked. Ride low. Park dumped ballast, dropped her profile, and skimmed the top of a pressure that roared in equations. The Seed pinwheeled, its plates turning into slag, into nothing, into memory. Where the cylinder had gone in, a darkness uncurled into absence, less like a wound than like an idea changing its mind. Telemetry on the cylinder, Park asked, because leadership says the hopeful thing even when it pads the ground for the fall. Kieran stared at numbers, then at the place where numbers had been. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Park put a hand on their shoulder anyway and left it there. Across the battle space, the secondaries faltered. With the Seed song gone, the choir lost its pitch. Fans lost formation, backed into one another, snapped at shadows. The fog thinned to glitter. The bucket brigade reeled lines in, coil by coil, a ritual with dignity. Tugs peeled off, some with paint scorched, one with a name letter half melted so it read just knee. Operation Anvil phase clear, Ortega said, voice steady as a drum. New orders, switch to Kiln 3. Methodical, fire breaks hold. No heat near habitats. You could hear the conclave breathe again, a sound like cultures relearning bravery. Arrow lancers wove through the detritus, pinning residual tendrils with cold iron pearls. Zamoth mirrors threw light not as weapon but as lantern for human ugliness to work by. Harmony medships moved along designated corridors, because even in victory space breaks bodies. Hours later, days in heart time, they had baked the last of the fans into clinkers. Marines returned along lines Park had refused to let anyone cut. Kieran counted them as they came. 67 Marines, 15 engineers, 3 pilots from boats with names that sounded like rivers. They did not count 2. Park stood her people in a bay that smelled of solvents and sweat and something sweet you sometimes mistake for hope. We held lines, she said. We bent history. We kept our map. She felt the place where a weight would live in her for the rest of the long road and did not try to put it down. We bring them home now. The ceremony at the conclave would have made a younger Park itch. It was all polished stone and speeches that lifted, and 1,000 eyes that finally understood something they should have seen when the Hobbs rolled in with her honest welds. That elegance isn't a synonym for courage. Ortega wore dress grays that sat wrong on shoulders used to plaits. She spoke not about cunning but about duty, about the price you choose with eyes open. She invoked Midway without triumph, Dunkirk without romance, the code talkers with gratitude, and just war with the bluntness of a carpenter describing plum. Kieran took the podium last and laid a clipboard on it like an altar piece. We counted, they said simply. We will keep counting. We will teach counting. Their light, if harmony beings have light, itched the eyes, and Park realized ethics could glow. Tugs paraded through feeds afterward. Bittyroot with a banner knitted from salvage, Nell with a new rope coiled like a medal. The archivists wrote that the day the conclave learned to ask for help from scows was the day it learned to win as a coalition. Someone painted a mural of ore dust turned to sunrise along a convoy lane. It made even the Zamoth stop and look for a long time. Park found Ortega by the Hobbs, palm on the same bulkhead Ortega had leaned on the day she sent Marines into a throat that wasn't. Permission to speak unprofessionally, Park said. Denied. Ortega said automatically and then smiled anyway. Say it. He was a good map, Park said. Reese. And Cole, he gave us a seam. Ortega's eyes were red the way a hard woman's eyes get, not leaking but frank about loss. Their names go on the rail, she said. She had ordered a strip of unpainted steel bolted to every bridge in the fleet. You touch it before you fight, you remember. What if the tide comes again? Park asked. It will, Ortega said. Something will. The universe doesn't care how tired we are. She looked up where the pulsar blinked on a screen stubborn as a heartbeat. But we know things now. That fire works when elegant fails. That lines hold when we tie them. That found families are logistics by another name. Kieran drifted close as if the question had been theirs all along. And that learning is a contagion, they added. We caught some of theirs, they caught some of ours. We'll need to be careful which lessons we keep. Park squeezed their shoulder once. Make me a list. We'll count them. When the fleet sailed again, not to burn but to build firebreak stations marked in every language, they flew different flags. Conclave sigils, Terran hazard stripes, a coil of rope painted on every prow. Children in ship schools learned to clap terrible rhythms with mittened hands, laughing at how wrong they sounded. Archivists taught geometry with corridors and corridors with ethics. Engineers left handwritten notes taped to panels that read, "If the lights go out, do this." On a quiet watch, Park stood alone on Milwaukee's bridge and let the old star beat into her bones. She hummed something crooked. The void did not answer, which was a mercy. She touched the rail where names lived, whispered two of them, and felt the ship answer under her feet with intent. "Lesson 1, she said to the dark, because you keep teaching even when the class has gone home. We still do fire." Then she added the part Cole would have wanted, the part Kieran would write carefully, the part Ortega had implied with every ugly, honest order. "And we still do mercy." The stars neither laughed nor wept. They simply burned as they always had, indifferent and necessary. Humanity moved among them like a species that for once had learned the right thing from pain.